Hello, lockdowners. It's Skeptics in the Hub time again. And I have helping me tonight, Steve, who is one of our skeptical team. Those of you who came to our in the pub meetings back when that was permissible, you will know Steve. Hello, Steve.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all.
And Steve's going to help me. I'm going to go into the control room and do all the technical stuff so that Steve can do all the talking. Save me so much of a sweaty problem. And the other guest, the expert guest tonight, is Jason Sarfo Annin. And here he is. Hello, Jason. How the devil are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How is everybody? And I'd like to thank you all for having me.
Great, you're welcome. It's our privilege, not yours. So can you tell our viewers a little bit about you, Jason, a little bit of backstory?
Yeah, so I am a junior doctor. I'm training to be a GP. I've taken a bit of a circuitous route to be here. I originally trained to be a hospital doctor. And I am here as an ambassador for Ask for Evidence, which is one of the campaigns of Sense for Science, which is a campaigning charity. I'm trying to encourage people to be able to ask organisations, ask journalists, ask politicians about the evidence behind the claims that they make.
This is a very topical service at the moment, isn't it? Because of the smear campaigns that are going on and the fake news that we have to face.
Yes, everybody, I'm sure, has been following the debate behind coronavirus, COVID-19. And I think anybody who's been looking into it has realized that there is no one single science. And there are lots of papers that have been published about the topic, and there's debate and disagreement amongst the scientists about the nature of the virus and about how best to be able to combat it. So it's really important that people can follow those discussions so they can understand the decisions that politicians make, and also the sort of rationale behind those decisions.
I'm pretty sure we'll be getting some questions from our viewers about that later on. But first, you've got a video, or a PowerPoint, I should say.
Yes.
Are you able to do that, or do you want me to put it up for you?
So I should be able to open that up. Let's do that now.
It's a damn good PowerPoint, I can tell people, because Jason sent it to me earlier.
You just have to take John's word for it. Yeah.
Well,
if it doesn't work.
So let's see if we can get the tech working.
We actually had a Sense About Science ambassador come to speak to us when we were in the pub a few years ago, because of course this is our parent company, if you like, is Worthing Skeptics in the pub. And so we had one of your compatriots some time ago, and we also had another one when we were running Junior Skeptics, and she came and spoke to about 90 children in one of our secondary schools in Worthing.
Oh, wow, I think it's really good when people are able to talk to children. It's something that I'm quite passionate about as well. Now, the easiest way for me to do this is to share my entire screen.
Okay.
I'll get that up and ready. And hopefully people can see the presentation. So whilst I'm in this mode, I won't be able to see every.
We won't see your face. We'll see your screen.
That's fine.
But we'll be able to hear you.
That's fine. So can everyone see the slides? Is it all up and running?
Not yet.
I think it's up to John to do something about it now.
But it hasn't come up. Not giving me that option.
Hasn't come up. Okay.
So it said that I have given permission for you to share.
Yeah, have you pressed the share button at the bottom of the StreamYard screen?
I have, and then something came up, and now I'm back to seeing you again. My apologies to you all. Right, what I'll do as an emergency, I had saved this in Google Slides, so I'll see if I can just load it up that way. So my apologies to everybody watching. Tech issues. Let's get that up and running. Chrome tab, share. Is that working?
Coming now, yes.
Okay,
Great.
so my apologies, some of the formatting might not be quite as it normally would be because I'm using it in Chrome rather than on PowerPoint. Slides are up, everybody can see?
Yep.
Okay, so thanks everybody for so Sense About Science. So this is a campaigning charity set up in 2002, and it is concerned with the use and understanding of evidence in public life, and it wants to make sure that there is sound science and evidence which is being used in public debates, in policy making, in the advertising that private companies make about their products. Ask for Evidence is a campaign from the charity. It's a public campaign, and it's about the public feeling empowered to ask for the evidence behind health claims, news stories, policy. One thing that I want people to leave tonight with the feeling of is that it is not just okay to ask questions, but actually you're allowed and you're entitled and you should be asking questions about the information that you receive. The campaign provides assistance to people, and they show you how to write the right questions, and also gives you a bit of understanding about the different types of evidence. Most people know that lots of pharmaceutical companies will trial drugs on sort of mice and then on humans, before it's allowed to be given to the public. That's one form of evidence, but there are other types of evidence where, for example, somebody may go and sit and watch a group of people behave. And how you analyze that information will be very different. About the campaign. So it set up in 2011, and there were some early career researchers who started challenging claims that had been made by a variety of organizations. And they collated the stories they collated the stories from this into a document called There Goes the Science Bit, which is available for download on the Ask for Evidence website if you're interested. The online hub was launched in 2013 as a go-to point for information for people to share stories and to provide information about the campaign. And a couple of years after that, in 2015, some ambassadors were recruited to give talks throughout the UK, a bit like I'm doing to you. And last year, 20 ambassadors were recruited from around the country, all range of backgrounds and interests, to further the work of the campaign. And the campaign has reached over hundreds of thousands of people, and people are still asking for for us to give talks and for information about the campaign. So there is a real sort of evident public need for this. So, as I've said, asking is easy. It's not a difficult thing to do, and it's important that people do ask when they feel that it's necessary. If it's a health claim or a promise that's made by a company about the effect of something, then ask about the science behind the claim. Have they done some sort of testing? Do they have more information that they could share with you? What's the mechanism behind the science? Has that information been what we call peer reviewed? Have other specialists in the field had a look at that information, decided that it's worthy of publication to the public and for people to be able to read? I'm going to give a few examples sort of later on. I'm also going to give a sort of a personal example of sort of where that sort of questioning was sort of quite important. But this will make a difference. It is important because we want people who make claims to be held accountable to them. And if we keep asking these questions, we keep sharing the information that we receive, this will become a norm. I appreciate that I come from a very sort of specific niche background where in my day-to-day, I have to think about information in this way. The medications that I prescribe for patients, I don't prescribe willy-nilly. I prescribe them because there is an evidence base behind them, which shows that they provide evidence for patients. And if that information is dubious or in question, then we have discussions about with our patients about whether these things are the right things to do. So an example that I'm going to give is with regards to a woman called KATY. So she went to the opticians. It was a national chain. And she was having a sort of, regular eye checkup, and she suffered from short-sightedness, myopia. And on her test, she was found to have something called an astigmatism. So an astigmatism is where the picture that goes through your lens doesn't line up properly on the retina. And that might be because your retina isn't sort of perfectly flat, or there might be a problem with your lens. Now, a lot of people have this. About a quarter of the population have an astigmatism. And for the vast majority of people, it's not an issue with some corrective lenses. The salesperson at the opticians said to her that she needed new glasses, and if she didn't have these glasses, then her eyesight could worsen. KATY felt that there wasn't much difference between her existing glasses and the new glasses they had offered when she put them on. They decided against it. What she did do when she got home is to email the company and say, I was given this information that my eyesight could worsen if I don't wear glasses for my astigmatism. Is this true? And the company got back to her, and they said, no, categorically, that's not true. It is only important for young children because their eyesight is still developing. But in adults, if you have an astigmatism and you choose not to correct it, that's okay. Your eyesight won't necessarily worsen. So they thanked her for the letter that she sent into them. And they also stated that they would go back to that particular employee and provide some information and some training about astigmatism so it doesn't happen again. So this was quite a powerful example of how sort of change can come about from something which is an everyday thing. There are millions of people who have eye tests. A very sort of simple piece of information which had been given, had been followed up, had been chased, and was found out to be incorrect. ELOISE is a woman who suffers with asthma. So asthma is a respiratory condition, and it affects the movement of air in and out of your lungs. Those of you who have it will be aware that it usually involves the use of inhalers to be able to control it. Asthma is quite an important condition. There's a lot of people who have it, but also there's a lot of people who die from it each year. And so it's really important that anybody who has the condition has their symptoms well controlled. And what most asthma sufferers aim for is a situation where they don't have a need to be able to use their inhalers. So she saw a claim from an organization called the Salt Cave, and they said that salt therapy had a greater than 75% efficacy in improving people's asthma. So that's then turning around saying that at least 75% of people who go through their treatments have a noticeable improvement in their asthma. Naturally, ELOISE thought this was a bit too good to be true, because if that was the case, then every asthmatic would be doing it, and it'd be sort of a well-known treatment. So she contacted the company, and they got back to her, and they provided her with some information about some research that had been performed using salts. So the idea is that you essentially inhale steam salt water. Now, the studies that they provided to her were not specific to asthma, which is the condition that she had, and they were about other respiratory conditions. And for some reason, a lot of the studies came out of Russia. And so she got back to them and said, well, hang on, the information you provided doesn't actually answer my original question. So she got in contact with us for evidence. And the campaign put her in contact with Asthma UK. And they provided information to her stating that salt therapy is what's regarded as a complementary therapy. So you don't use it instead of the sort of mainstay medical treatment, but you can use it alongside. And there's very little evidence that it does make a significant difference to people's asthma. So ELOISE had some interaction with the company concerned, but also contacted the campaign, which was able to help her. And there are quite a few people who have got in contact with the campaign and have been able to who have been helped in this way. Now, coronavirus is topical, and a friend of mine who I'm sure won't mind me talking about this, given that I've anonymized them, sent me this picture on the left-hand side. And the message that came with it was, are you taking vitamin D? So as an Afro-Caribbean, it is well known that we in the Western world struggle to be able to get our vitamin D levels up. There's less sunlight here than there is closer to the equator, and we don't spend as much time in it as we should. And so I looked at this and thought, well, on first glance, you'd look at this and say, somebody, who's got, severe, COVID-19, a lot of them have really, really low vitamin D. There's a lot of red there. And a lot of people who have mild COVID-19 actually have high levels of vitamin D. Gosh, I should take that. But before you even begin to ask those sorts of questions, the first thing that you have to ask is, where has this information come from? And on the right-hand side, you'll begin to see the start of my sort of critical appraisal of this graph and the sort of process that I took my friend through. So Grassroots Health are a organisation who are focused on vitamin D research. And so they're the people that put this graph together. They very kindly put a citation in the bottom left-hand corner. And so I was able to find the paper behind this graph. And I will bring it up now. I'm sort of going to talk you through it. I think it's important to talk through because, as I sort of mentioned earlier, science isn't fixed, and there's a lot of information which is published and out there, and it's very difficult for the public to understand sort of what's true and what's not. So, with this particular paper, it was not what we call peer-reviewed. So a group of other specialists in this area hadn't gone through their work and critiqued it and praised it and said that it was suitable for publication. That's really, really important because that means that the evidence in this letter is of a much lower standard than something that you would read in the British Medical Journal or the Lancet Journal. The author was a doctor from the Philippines, and provided their contact details for people to be able to ask some questions. Now, the data in this paper was used from 3 hospitals in South Asia. Now, in this paper, it's not stated from where. South Asia, to my mind, is the Indian subcontinent. So that could be anywhere from Colombia and Sri Lanka up to, Jammu and Kashmir, which is bordered by Tibet. The reason that is important is that Sri Lanka is quite significantly closer to the equator than Jammu and Kashmir is, and therefore the amount of sunlight that you get based on those 2 locations would be very different. You would naturally expect people who live closer to the equator to have better vitamin D levels because they're exposed to stronger sunlight and for longer. The next thing about this paper was the number of people that it looked at. So there were 212 cases, which is quite a small number. So the sorts of numbers that are normally used in trials, which lead to sort of medications being produced, are tens of thousands. That said, COVID-19 is a new disease, so it's a bit unreasonable to be able to expect those numbers. But even allowing for that, this is sort of quite a small number of people. So it's what the medical professionals call is not appropriately powered. There's not enough people in there to be able to definitively say whether there is whether the findings that have been found are true or due to luck. Now, when you go through essentially a letter from this doctor, you look at the numbers and you realise that actually there are people who had mild cases of COVID-19 who had low vitamin D. And actually, if I go back to the picture, you can see that in the red and the bar on the far right. And there are actually people who had what was defined as critical COVID-19 who actually had normal levels. So, just at first glance, you can turn around and say, well, having low vitamin D levels is not necessarily an issue in itself. Now, the author of this letter, was very open and honest. We need to get a little bit more information about this. I've got a small number of people that I've looked at, but it's a starting point of discussion, and hopefully some people will be able to look into this in a lot more detail with a lot more people, which was very admirable and fair and appropriate. So after reading all of this, I had the discussion with my friend, and I said, well, what do you think of it when we sort of talk through it? And then they asked for sort of my views, and I said, well, on the basis of this letter, would I go around and tell people that they need to go and take vitamin D? No, I wouldn't. There's not enough information here for me to be able to turn around and make that claim. That said, and I appreciate that I can say this because I am a medical professional, if somebody was taking vitamin D on the basis of this paper, would I be turning around and saying to them that they absolutely have to stop? Actually, no, I wouldn't. Vitamin D supplementation can be bought from Boots or any other pharmacy. The risk of harm from taking vitamin D is minuscule. And so if somebody wants to supplement their vitamin D by taking tablets, that's fine. That's on them. They're not going to come to harm. If vitamin D was something that caused real harm to people, if we were talking about some sort of toxin, then obviously my view would be different here. But getting that nuance from this paper required reading it, going through it, and going through the results, and having to think about the data that had been produced. This is the sort of thing that scientists, medical professionals do on a regular basis. And whilst asked for evidence is not asking you to go through this process, I wanted to give this example to turn around and show that actually information is freely available on the internet. You can find this information. You can always go and ask people who can help you in trying to understand it. I hope that sort of anecdote made some sense. So, what if the information that you are told about doesn't quite make sense, or the information that you're given by a company doesn't make sense? Well, Ask for Evidence has an online help center, and there are tools there to be able to help people make sense of the information they are given. There is a sort of resource center there, which helps you to be able to assess and appraise the evidence. And the way that I sort of talked you through that letter, it's not about taking people back to school, but it's about understanding the nature of science. Any sort of new breakthrough in science has to be appraised in this way, and any change to sort of medical practice goes through this process. And if you're still stuck after going through all of this, you can contact the team at Sense About Science, and they have links to a wide variety of scientists and other professionals, and they can put you in contact with somebody who can help you understand the information that you've received. So, use us. It's important that people have sort of critical thinking skills. Young people, which is a sort of group that I'm, very passionate about. There are some activity packs which are specifically made for young people. The Evidence Hunter activity pack. So if you have children and you want to get them involved and engaged, there are resources that are out there and available. And I appreciate that the vast majority of people have their children at home at the moment, but they do even have a lesson plan to be able to teach critical thinking skills to children. So if you still have your children at home and you are looking for things to be able to keep them occupied with, then for your secondary school children, there is a pack there that you can use and download and go through with your children. So finally, get involved. If you have seen a claim, and you're not quite sure, the validity of it, ask. And if you don't get an answer, then get in contact with the campaign, and we will be able to help you. If you want more information, then please visit the Ask for Evidence website. If there are other organisations that you're involved with and you would like an ambassador to come and talk, then contact the campaign, and one of us would be more than happy to come along. We're dotted all around the UK, so there's normally somebody nearby who can, in usual times, come and give a talk, or any of us can give an online talk as we have done today. And use the resources that are available on the website. You can share those with people and signpost those, other people to them. One thing that I would like to say, and I'm sure you will appreciate, is that we really want to know whether the campaign is doing its job, whether it is reaching a large number of people, whether it is engaging people, whether it is getting people to change their behaviours. So I will make available a link which can be filled out at the end of this talk, just so that Ask for Evidence can get an idea of the nature of the impact that it's having. So I'd really, really appreciate it if people could fill that and complete that for the campaign. Apologies for the formatting, but in terms of the information that's out there, so there is the Sense About Science website, senseaboutscience.org. There's the Ask for Evidence website. Sense About Science is on Twitter and uses the hashtag Ask for Evidence and Evidence Ambassadors. And the email for Sense About Science is on the right-hand side there, hello@senseaboutscience.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. I think that was excellent. That was really good. Yeah, and I think the work you're doing with Sense About Science is fantastic. I think it's exactly what we need. Yeah. So with your organization, who does the research? If somebody was to submit a question, do you outsource it to experts in those fields, or do you have people on staff that whose job it is to collate information and bring together responses?
So there is a network of specialists which the organisation uses. By and large, what they're focused on is empowering and enable people to be able to get that information for themselves and to be able to appraise that information for themselves. But in the example that I gave with regards to ELOISE and the asthma, actually that needed specialist input, and they were able to come in contact with people. So it's quite well connected. So if there is something quite niche, quite specialist, or where the evidence is a bit grey, then there are people available that the campaign can contact for you. Right.
Okay. Do you ever deal with the Advertising Standards Authority or groups like that in order to try and shut down companies that are making misleading claims about products or things like that?
So I'm aware of a case where an organisation, I don't know whether the Advertising Standards Agency were involved, but it basically led to them changing the adverts that they were making. But I'm not quite sure whether the ASA were involved or whether somebody asking the question made them realise that, hang on, actually, we might get into trouble here, and therefore we should change the information that we're putting out there.
Right. Okay.
Can I put in something on this topic? Because I'm aware of an activity that was called HOTS, Healing on the Streets. And this was done in Bath when all the Christian churches got together and decided they were going to do a sort of recruitment drive. So they went out onto the streets and they gave out leaflets. And the leaflets claimed that they could pray away any illness. There was a whole list of common illnesses, and at the bottom it said, and any other condition. And somebody who belonged to I can't remember whether it was Bath Skeptics or a similar sort of organization, appealed to the Advertising Standards Authority, who said that they'd have to stop giving out this information because it couldn't be validated. And so they did stop giving out that particular leaflet, but they also appealed because in their view, it was possible for their God to cure anything. And there was no way that, the Advertising Standards Authority should prevent people from believing that. So I think the current state of play is they've stopped making the wild claims, but they're still making more modest claims.
That's why we need organisations like the ASA, but that's also why we need people to challenge, because without somebody challenging that, those leaflets would still be being handed out.
Yes, the ASA said it offers false hope and therefore shouldn't be permitted.
Mm. Speaking of false hope, I can see that there's a question here from Conrad Dato. Apologies if I've not pronounced it correctly. So the question, and for those who can't see it, is where do you stand on the issue of hydroxychloroquine as coronavirus treatment? So where do I stand? I don't know, is the sort of simple answer to that. There are lots of trials going on. Actually, the practice that I work on is actually enrolled in a trial where patients who meet certain criteria, certain age, but have coronavirus are going to be given hydroxychloroquine to see if that improves their symptoms, but also B, if it shortens the duration of the illness, shortens the duration of their illness. So we don't know, and that's why there are trials like this that are going on, which my practice are involved in, and there's plenty of trials going on all around the world looking at hydroxychloroquine in different settings, such as the hospital as well.
That's great. Speaking of the pandemic, are you aware of those claims that were going around about a month ago? It was advertised that some professor in Israel or something, he'd done a statistical analysis on all the different countries that had this particular coronavirus pandemic, and he'd found that whether you have a lockdown or not makes no difference. The graphs in every country rise to the same level, and within about 20 days it peaks and then levels off afterwards. Did you see that? It was in quite a few of the papers, and I think in particular people with political views were promoting that and making a big deal out of that. So
if you're referring to the Swedish epidemiologist Giesecke, I think is his name. I don't know if that's the person you're referring to. So I have no. So
it was this guy called Isaac Ben Israel, an Israeli professor / mathematician. So he's not an epidemiologist, but he is a mathematician, and he says that he modeled it in different countries, and he found that whether they had a lockdown or not, the graphs all looked the same. They all took the same amount of time to reach a peak and then level off afterwards. And it just sounded very implausible to me.
Okay. So there is an argument about this. There obviously was sort of Professor Ferguson at Imperial who produced his modelling, which led to our lockdown happening in the UK. And in Sweden, they've taken a very different approach to the UK. Mm-hmm. And the epidemiologist I was referring to actually gave an interview on a media platform. I think it was Unheard, actually, was the website. And he gave an interview explaining, in his view, he didn't feel that a shutdown in the way that most of Europe has undertaken would make that much difference in the long run in terms of deaths. So just to give a bit of background to people, during a pandemic, there are more deaths than there normally would be. However, the way that deaths are counted is very different in every country. And so that can make it really difficult to be able to understand whether the increase in deaths was truly due to whatever the issue was. So the only true way to be able to get an idea of how a pandemic has impacted on the country is to look at something called excess mortality, which is basically the difference between the number of deaths you would normally expect during a week, during a month, compared to previous years versus what you're experiencing now. And so that's the key thing to look at when this pandemic is done. What I should say is that not all of that excess mortality will be due to COVID-19. There will be people who are delaying. Well, I have seen people who have delayed attending A&E, and some of those people, will come to harm, and there will be some people who die because they haven't got the treatment they normally would have done in a timely manner, and whether that be due to fear of going to hospital and catching the coronavirus there, or sort of difficulties in accessing the usual healthcare. So Giuseppe, going back to his argument, he felt that the most important thing to do in a society is protect the vulnerable, so protect your elderly, but actually let everybody get on with it. He felt that there would be a low number of people that would die from it, sort of an order of magnitude of sort of less than 1%, and if you're exposing the virus to the young and protecting people in care homes and people with significant illnesses that puts them at risk, then actually the mortality in the well population is actually that much lower than it would be for a population where you've got the young and the old and sort of everybody included. So if that's an argument that you sort of wish to explore and have a look at, I would very much recommend having a listen to that. And I think that actually they also invited on Professor Ferguson to give a rebuttal to it as well. And I think actually that's watching those two videos will be quite good for being able to understand the differences in opinion and how the science is not one science. There are differences in opinion within it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it sounds like one of these things where we're only really going to be able to give a confident answer in hindsight a few months down the line. And it feels almost like people are looking at very short-term trends because, this has only been going on for a couple of months, and then they're extrapolating based on that, or they're picking their start point and their end point, and they're saying, oh, look, it's level, it's not really changing, whereas you need more data over a longer period of time to really be able to.
Yes, and so what is very important to point out is that any model is only as good as the information that's put into it, and is only good at that point in time. If I'm sure Imperial are doing this, but the models that Imperial are doing in relation to the pandemic will be different now to what they produced a month ago, just because we have that much more information. So it's really important for people to remember that models have assumptions that go into them, and the nature of those assumptions can have quite a significant impact on what you get at the end of it. And that's why we have sort of all these clever mathematicians that look into it, but also why we have public health specialists, consultants in communicable disease, infectious diseases, epidemiologists who also work on this, because it's important, and you don't want politicians to be making decisions that they shouldn't be doing, with sort of incorrect or flawed.
Sure. Have we lost? You're back. I thought we'd lost you there for a bit. Yeah. Okay. I see we have a question here from Terence. Can you see that? Are you with us, Jason?
Yes, I can. So who do you think are the worst offenders I've had to deal with regarding failure to produce evidence? So there is an intravenous drip company. I won't name them for fear of libel or slander, but they have a couple of places in the southeast where they offer people the ability to go in and have an intravenous drip. So anybody who's ever been to a hospital or to A&E, you'll have doctors who will put in a cannula, a little plastic tube into a vein where they can give you medications. The drips that they're producing and giving to people, have claim that they replenish you and that they provide vital vitamins, and there are lots of issues with this, but the single most important thing is the question to ask is there any benefit from getting these vitamins, through a drip versus taking them in the mouth? I would turn around to say if there was, then the healthcare system that we have and the healthcare systems all around the world, we're providing those for people, and so it's quite clear that they don't. But it's very difficult to be able to get information out of them to be able to back up their claims. And I actually think that they've been picked up by a national newspaper. I think a national newspaper has at some point sort of done a piece on this particular organisation as well.
Right.
They're a company that I've struggled to get clear information out of.
That's great. So with that vitamin D question you were addressing earlier, it struck me that there could well be confounding factors there. That even if there was that correlation, it could be due to other things. I mean, in that paper, did they attempt to find out what potential confounding factors there could be and eliminate those? So, for example, it could be the case that, say, poorer people have a less varied diet, and perhaps they both have a lower vitamin D in their diet, and they're also more more susceptible to be affected in a worse way by COVID-19. What are your thoughts about that?
So that's a really good point. And the reason that I pointed out the sort of issue about the geography is that people will know that Sri Lankans are darker than Northern Indians by virtue of how much sunlight that they have and their proximity to the equator. So actually, if those 212 people were all Sri Lankan, it's very difficult to be able to turn around and take that information and to turn around and say that that's applicable and appropriate in Sweden, for example. There's issues that you've mentioned, in terms of socioeconomic status. It didn't give any information about whether they were male, whether they were female, their ages. So there are lots of variables here. And, in an ideal world, what you would want to do is to create a trial where you can control for as many of those factors as possible. And, you have, one group that you compare to another and they're quite similar in their characteristics. Do all manner of things. So yeah, there are tons of confounding factors, which haven't even been mentioned in that paper. And in fairness to the author, that's why they did turn around and say that sort of more research needed to be performed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So Jason,
There we go. John's going to join us again.
hello. Yes, I've been skulking in the background here. So we have some even worse stories from other parts of the world. Have you heard about this miracle mineral water?
Miracle Mineral Solutions, MMS.
Yeah, it's just salt water again, but it's being sold as
It's bleach.
Yeah, that's right, because they put a drop of acid in it, don't they? So the salt ions dissociate and it makes a chlorine solution. And they're forcing it to babies in order to help them with whatever conditions they imagine they've got. Do we need some sort of world legislation to control this sort of abuse of information?
Well, I would say that the story that you've given is the first I've heard about it. So I'm out of the loop, but wow. What Ask for Evidence are doing is applicable in every single country in the world. It is not just for the UK. It's not just for Western Europe or North America. I guess I would turn around and say that anybody that's worked in a sort of global organization or in sort of some multinational group will recognize that it's quite difficult to be able to get coordinated action. I appreciate I keep bringing back things to the coronavirus, but it's topical. Lots of people have turned around and said that the world hasn't worked in a coordinated fashion with regards to dealing with coronavirus. So whilst it would be lovely to have some sort of massive, all-powerful, sort of worldwide ask for evidence organization, different countries have different laws, different rules. It would be unwieldy and bureaucratic. I think what's important is that what Ask for Evidence is doing is shared, and people in their local environments take that on and sort of reproduce that. So I imagine that if somebody in, I don't know, Chile contacted Ask for Evidence and asked them for information about their campaign and how to replicate that, I'm sure the organisation would be delighted to be able to pass on that information, because evidence is evidence. It doesn't matter whether the evidence is generated in the UK or whether it's generated in Chile.
Mm-hmm. How do you define evidence, Jason?
Ooh. Well, I guess we talk about it in medicine, something called tiers of evidence, and that's how we sort of talk about it. So you've got your body of information, and how valid that information or how true that information is requires that sort of critical appraisal. So there's actually a website, I think it's at casp-uk.net, which is a website that many medical students has used at some point in their life, which provides a glossary and some information about the appraisal of evidence, the hierarchies and the tiers of evidence, and actually how you go about appraising a paper. So, in medicine, we regard, well, in terms of a trial, we regard a randomized controlled trial as the gold standard. So that is where a trial where you've got one group of people receiving, a treatment or some other intervention. You've got another group of people who haven't, and those two groups are similar in every single possible way imaginable. And then you measure the difference between the two. And in that situation, the people who are receiving the treatments ideally don't know what they're receiving, and the people who are performing the trial also don't know who's getting what. So we call that sort of double-blinded. So the investigators are blinded and the recipients are blinded. And that, in terms of trials, that's a sort of gold standard. There is a level above that called a meta-analysis, and there's an organization called the Cochrane Collaboration. Meta-analysis is basically taking together all the different trials that have happened on a particular topic, analyzing them and seeing overall whether there is a difference or not. So, for example, if you wanted to find out whether a particular treatment was helpful in a particular situation, you may find that some investigators in Brazil get a different result to investigations in Japan, to investigations in France, and it's quite difficult to be able to tease out why there may be those differences. So, a meta-analysis would essentially have a look at all of those trials and sort of come together to give a sort of global overview. And for the sort of big changes that occur in sort of medical practice, and they normally come as a consequence of that sort of work.
I tried to share the screen with CASP on it. Did you see that? Did that come up all right?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, because I wanted to also share another screen so that people can see how to get to Sense About Science, which is, one minute, this website. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
There's a little video down here.
Yeah.
41 seconds. Yeah, that was very cute, wasn't it?
Yeah. So on the Sense About Science website, at the top on the tabs, there is a section there about their campaigns, and there is a dedicated website for Ask About Evidence. So askforevidence.org, and you can get to that through that link.
And also you can get to the kids stuff too, so that
yes,
they can get in. Great. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it seems to be mostly medical. Is that the case, or can they ask any sort of question?
No, any sort. So that's the lens that I have given my job. But as you saw in that video, there are plenty of claims made about sort of all manner of things, and there will be specialists that the campaign can contact if you have something particularly specific which you're struggling to get information on. But the decision as to whether to have 15 children or 30 children in a classroom and how that affects their learning, that's not medical, but that's really important, and that really affects public policy. And so that's a precise sort of thing that you should be asking questions about, or trying to look for information about, should you wish.
For a minute, I thought you were going to say 15 children in a family. You didn't.
That'll be fun.
No. So yeah. What if it's okay, I was going to show one last thing.
Go ahead.
I'm going to share my screen again. So if we get that up and running,
I'll go into the back room again.
Hi.
Right. So has that worked? Or do I?
We just got to wait on John to start presenting.
Yeah, sorry, it came and went, I'm afraid. Try again.
That's fine.
Technology, eh?
Yeah, no, that's. It's mainly my computer. It's a little bit slow. Right. Just loading the presentation. There we go. Right, let's try again. So.
Here it comes.
How's that? Can everybody see that now?
Yep, it's loading.
How's that come up for everybody?
Looks great.
Okay, all right. So this is a cartoon from about 10 years ago. There are sort of some minor issues with it, but I still think it's quite relevant, which is why I'm sort of bringing it up and showing it to people. Basically, this cartoon was created to be able to give people the ability to be able to look for clues as to whether claims that are made by people are, are true and are valid. And they basically give some warning signs. So they're sort of warning signs for quackery, I think was the title. 12 red flags for quackery was the title of the cartoon. And so, in the top left corner, we've got testimonials, which is essentially anecdotes. So, if somebody said that it worked, doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. And so if a claim is made and it's based on sort of testimonials, and that should sort of provide a warning flag. The next one is about helping the body. There was the issue with the prayer in bath, which we made earlier. If something heals the body or helps the body, that's quite vague, and that should also be sort of a warning sign that something isn't quite right. The celebrity doctor. So probably more an issue in the US than it is here. But just because a doctor on TV said something doesn't necessarily mean that is true. The very good sort of media doctors will send people in the direction to be able to go and find their information. And it's also sort of to know whether they have sort of a book deal and a book that they need to promote as well, because that should also be sort of a warning sign, and that's sort of raised at the bottom there. So I'll happily provide the link for the sort of original picture for people. But I just thought that, seeing as we're talking about science, and we're talking about looking for evidence, I think this is a great cartoon of sort of little sort of flags that people should sort of be aware of in claims that should make them sort of hunt a little bit further. So yeah, this is great, and I recommend that everybody has it sort of saved on their desktop and for sort of reference every once in a while, and to share it around as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. Who's Brzezinski on the previous slide?
Oh, so let me go back and bring him up. Right, so Brzezinski. So as I say, this is written for an American audience. So
Right.
He's a biochemist and physician that ran a cancer treatment center out of Texas. And if I recall correctly, he started spreading sort of rumors that there was a particular treatment which helped cancer patients and gave a miracle cure. And it involved taking a lot of money from these cancer patients. And the treatment was declared ineffective. So this is, I think, the 70s. So his treatment was declared ineffective when it was actually looked at. And lots of oncologists, said it was all sort of nonsense. And he didn't publish the sort of results that had come out of the work that he'd been doing. But yeah, this sort of behavior, as you can imagine, made lots of doctors incredibly upset, but also made lots of the general public incredibly upset as well. It's important that sort of scientists, hold sort of, it's important that the public sort of, hold scientists and doctors in esteem. So this sort of behaviour wasn't sort of looked well upon. But the key thing about him is that he didn't publish his results. So if you've got any doctor who's turning around saying that there's a trial which is working, which is doing wonderful things, it's quite a reasonable thing to ask them, where's the data behind this? It may be pre-publication, it may be that they haven't actually got it yet, but it's on the way out, and that's completely reasonable. But anybody who doesn't publish their work, it should again be somebody that you question.
That reminds me of a particular scientist, Linus Pauling. He was PhD, got a Nobel Prize in some area of science, and not a medical field, and he took it into his head that vast, huge doses of vitamin C would cure pretty much everything. And this is something we've got to look out for when scientists step outside their area of expertise and start making pronouncements for which they're not qualified. And unfortunately, people see their doctor and they see their Nobel and they think he must be right.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I am not an epidemiologist, so I cannot talk about the epidemiology of SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19. That's not my job. That's not my role. I'm aware that there are doctors who have done so, and I would turn around and say to people, challenge us. If you ever see me, on social media or come across me and I'm saying things that don't quite stack up, it is okay to challenge me and to ask, why am I saying what I'm saying? Where is the evidence base behind that? And just because I'm a doctor doesn't necessarily mean that everything that I say, is correct. My views on how many children should be in the class is not relevant to my job. So just because I'm a doctor, my views on that are completely irrelevant.
Yes. Yes, one of the things that we don't do in science is worship authority. It's rather like not accepting testimony, because testimony is very anecdotal, and scientific reports are quite a different style.
They are, and Linus Pauling himself, Nobel Prize winner, any single paper, that he produced, it would have had to have gone through a panel of other scientists looking at his work, appraising it, and deeming it suitable for publication. So it doesn't matter, what reputation you have, you still have to go through that process whenever you produce any work.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. But our time is up. Jason, Steve, and viewers, thank you very much. Maybe we'll do this another day, if Jason is willing.
Yeah, no, and I'm more than happy to. And thank you very much for having me. And I hope people who are watching and listening found this useful.
It will be as a podcast on our both of our platforms, and people will be able to comment and question. You might like to join in and answer some of the questions if we ask you nicely enough.
I'm sure that can be arranged.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys.
Cheers,
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Stay safe.